Is Ukraine's push in Bakhmut having even more success? But is Russia already on the counterattack? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's May 15th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. But as always, guys, I got to shout out combatvetnews.com. You know that Patreon and even YouTube have become increasingly unwelcoming to Ukraine content. That's why I launched combatvetnews.com. It has all the news stories that I don't have a chance to get to here on the daily update. It also has all my YouTube videos for free. But if you become a member, any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the Discord and, more importantly, the members only videos. This is where I take a look at the combat footage and that I can't show you on YouTube. I break everything down, including on Friday, we did all of the first batch of footage coming out of Ukraine's counteroffensive. It's a really great way to see in detail how Ukraine is really fighting this battle. So if you want to support what I do, combatvetnews.com. Okay, so let's talk about the control map. Now, here is the situation around Bakhmut. There's been a couple of interesting changes. First, if you look at the city center, you can see Wagner forces are continuing to advance, especially along this roadway here specifically. It's fairly apparent that Ukraine is not interested in pushing in the city center, the urban areas specifically. And the reason for that is that it's very tedious to fight in these urbanized areas. And it's much, much simpler to encircle an urban area and force your enemy to abandon their positions instead of trying to drive them out of each building, every room, every basement. It simply takes too long and gives the enemy too much opportunity to reposition their forces, to dig in, etc. So it makes sense that Ukraine is really just trying to stabilize this line along the urban part of Bakhmut. And what we're seeing instead is, of course, pushes both to the north and to the south. So near Berkiva, we can see that in the last 24 hours, right, we've seen Ukrainian forces push up along this northern front here, again, forcing Russian forces to withdraw along this reservoir. We also, when we look to the south, you can see that Russian forces, as we've talked about, have withdrawn from this forested salient. Again, they're under probably considerable Ukrainian pressure, so it makes sense that they're abandoning positions here. And this is a microcosm of the larger Bakhmut strategy, right? These Russian positions in this forest would be very hard to dislodge, right? A tank and other armored vehicles can't get through forest. It's harder to direct artillery. Wood, trees and other debris can help build very, very resilient trenches and shelters. It's just a tough fight, a tough nut to crack. And so to solve it, Ukrainian forces, again, forced this encirclement function, trying to cut off Russian forces in this forest. But before, of course, they could complete their encirclement, the threat of it caused Russian forces to withdraw from their positions. So I likely think this is, again, an ordered withdrawal. This is not Ukrainians fighting it out. And I think it's indicative of sort of the larger strategy that you're going to see here, bypassing urban centers and highly defensible positions in favor of open terrain and maneuver. And that is a pretty effective method. You can see already Russian forces. I mean, you could see the considerable change in territorial control in this very, very vulnerable point. You can tell that suddenly the ability to move troops in and out of Bakhmut, much more open, much less contested. And for the troops defending Bakhmut, this is a massive difference already. And this alone may be the objective of this operation, right? But I suspect they're going to continue to push. They're going to use this momentum. There's no reason to abandon momentum when you have the enemy continuing to withdraw as they have been. As you guys can see, right, we'll look at the combat map real quick. You can see that Russian forces are focused on just a couple of things. Chiefly, they are trying to counterattack in and around the Berkiva or Klachivka areas, as well as, of course, in Bakhmut itself. They are also concentrating a small offensive action here near near Dvorichne. And this is, again, a part of a very systematic effort to probably pin Ukrainian forces in place and prevent Ukrainian forces from reallocating many of their troops to support these other offensive efforts. And of course, you have a lone attack in Marinka. So a sign that while Russian forces are limited in their offensive efforts, they're probably focused primarily on offense as the best defense, spoiling attacks, shaping operations, counterattacks, that sort of thing. When we talk about, of course, when we look over, the UK Ministry of Defense has some interesting stories that Ukraine is using many of its uncrewed aerial vehicles to strike Russia's air bases, sometimes fairly deep into Russian territory. This one 150 kilometers north of the border. And it points out that they're actually targeting heavy transport aircraft. These are not combat aircraft per se, but instead they are targeting Russia's military transport aviation, which is a branch of their military responsible for moving troops quickly across the large sort of vastness of Russia. You may notice that many of the units in this conflict are actually based in sometimes deep in Russia, right, in Russian military bases. And to get them to the front lines requires oftentimes the use of transport aircraft. Obviously, with that transport aircraft damaged, it's harder to reinforce your positions. And this reflects sort of the as we've talked about, the Ukrainian effort, and this is how every good offensive should go, is that you engage in a level of deep preparation, and that is damaging infrastructure, damaging their ability to conduct logistics and command and control. You degrade that, but then when the actual offensive happens, you need to interrupt their ability to conduct resupply. And this is another example of targeting that ability to bring fresh troops in to replace losses in Bakhmut. So again, it's sort of like siphoning almost all the fuel out of a car and then driving it really fast, right? As the Russian war machine burns the fuel, which is logistics and people, its ability to put more fuel into the engine is limited, right? The gas tank isn't as deep. And so it finds itself running out of fuel faster because its burn rate is so high. Again, a function of Ukrainian offensive efforts. Anyway, guys, that's all I had for you for today. Thank you guys, as always. Of course, a special thank you to all the members of combatvetnews.com, especially our colonel tier members and our lieutenant tier members. You guys are the ones who make this whole thing possible. Really, I appreciate you guys so much. I'll see you in the next one.